On the morning of my college graduation, my father handed my younger sister the keys to a brand new Mercedes like he was crowning a queen. Then he turned to me, pointed at the bus stop, and said I was used to handling things on my own. I walked to the station with my gown dragging on the concrete, feeling like a stranger in my own life. But when the announcer read my name with highest honors, I saw my father's eyes shift. He realized his control was slipping. My name is Brooklyn Young. I am 22 years old, and if you looked at the scene playing out in the driveway of my childhood home in Roanoke, Virginia, you would assume I was the spectator of someone else's life. It was 9 in the morning on a Saturday. The humidity was already climbing, making the air thick and sticky, the kind of Virginia weather that plastered your hair to the back of your neck within seconds. I stood near the garage door, sweating under the synthetic weight of my black graduation gown. The mortarboard cap was pinned uncomfortably tight against my scalp. I held my honor cords in one hand and my student ID in the other. I was ready. I had been ready for 4 years, but nobody was looking at me. The center of the universe was parked 5 feet away. It was a polar white Mercedes-Benz C-Class, brand new, with dealer plates still on the front and back. It gleamed with an aggressive, blinding shine that made my eyes hurt. A massive red bow, the size of a beach ball, sat on the hood. It looked like something out of a holiday commercial, the kind where a loving husband surprises his wife in a snowy driveway. Except there was no snow, and this wasn't for a wife, it was for Kelsey. My sister leaned against the driver's side door, posing. She was 20, 2 years younger than me, and she wasn't graduating from anything today. She was currently taking a break from community college to focus on her mental health and her Instagram following. She wore a sundress that probably cost more than my entire semester of textbooks. She tilted her head, laughing at something my father said, her hand resting casually on the side mirror as if she had been born attached to German engineering. Rick, my father, crouched on the asphalt with his phone out. He was directing the scene with the intensity of a Vogue photographer. "Chin up, Kels," he shouted, snapping 3 photos in rapid succession. "Turn to the left. Let the light hit the logo. Perfect. Now look surprised. Look like you just saw it," Kelsey squealed. A practiced, high-pitched sound that grated on my nerves. She threw her hands up, covering her mouth in mock shock. Rick grinned. He loved this. He loved being the provider, the man who made big things happen. He loved the aesthetic of success, provided it was photogenic. I shifted my weight from one foot to the other. My cheap black heels were pinching my toes. I cleared my throat, not loudly, just enough to exist. "We need to leave soon," I said. "We have to be at the Berglund Center by 10 or they close the doors for the procession." Rick didn't look up from his phone screen. He was swiping through the photos, checking the lighting. "Hang on. Brooklyn, we are having a moment here." I looked at the car again. It was beautiful. I could admit that. It was sleek and modern and smelled, even from here, like leather and money. I looked at the driveway behind it. My car, if you could call it that, was a 10-year-old sedan with a cracked bumper and a transmission that whined like a dying animal. I had bought it myself from a neighbor for $800 when I was 17. It was currently parked on the street because the Mercedes needed the prime spot. Mom came out of the front door, holding a travel mug of coffee. She didn't look at me either. She walked straight to Kelsey and adjusted the strap of her dress. "You look gorgeous, sweetie," Mom said. "This car suits you. It really does." "Thank you. Mommy?" Kelsey cooed. She opened the door and sat in the driver's seat, gripping the leather steering wheel. "It feels so right. I feel like me in here." I checked my watch. 9:15. The panic started to rise in my chest. A cold, familiar fluid. "Dad," I said, a little louder this time. "The ceremony starts at 10. We really need to go. Traffic is going to be a nightmare downtown." Rick finally stood up. He brushed imaginary dust off the knees of his khakis. He looked at the Mercedes, then at Kelsey, and finally, he turned his head to look at me. His eyes were blue, like mine, but they lacked any warmth. They were calculation machines. He scanned my outfit. the black gown, the cap, the sensible shoes, and gave a short, dismissive nod. Right, graduation. He reached into his pocket. My heart did a stupid, traitorous little flip. For a split second, a fraction of a second, I thought he was going to pull out a second set of keys. I thought maybe, just maybe, this was a dual surprise. Maybe the Mercedes was for Kelsey because she needed help, and he had something else for me. Or maybe he was going to hand me the keys to his SUV, letting me drive myself in comfort. He pulled out his hand. It was empty. He gestured toward the end of the driveway, past the Mercedes, past the mailbox, down the hill toward the main road. You know the route, Rick said. I stared at him. The air around us seemed to stop moving. I could hear a lawnmower buzzing 3 houses down. What? I asked. The bus. Brooklyn, he said, his voice flat and practical. The number 51 runs every 20 minutes. It drops you right in front of the Civic Center. I blinked. I felt my face getting hot, a flush of humiliation rising from my neck. You want me to take the bus? On my graduation day? Rick sighed, the sound of a man burdened by unreasonable demands. Look, honey, we are all going in the new car to celebrate Kelsey. It is her first drive. We do not want to cram everyone in and wrinkle her dress. Plus, parking is going to be $40 at the garage. You have a student pass. It is free for you. He turned back to the car. He wasn't angry. He wasn't being malicious. Or at least, he didn't think he was. That was the worst part. To him, this was just logic. I was the capable one. I was the one who figured things out. Kelsey was the delicate flower that needed a $60,000 climate-controlled vase. You are used to it, he added over his shoulder. You have been taking the bus for 4 years. It builds character. Mom was already in the passenger seat. Kelsey was revving the engine, a soft, powerful purr that sounded like a predator. We will see you there, Kelsey yelled through the open window. Don't be late. Rick opened the back door and slid in. He slammed the door shut. The tinted windows rolled up, turning them into silhouettes. I stood there, a black smudge on the concrete. As the white Mercedes reversed out of the driveway, Kelsey honked the horn twice, a cheerful, oblivious beep-beep, and then they peeled away, accelerating smoothly down the street. I watched them go until they turned the corner. The silence that followed was heavy. I looked down at my gown. The hem was brushing against the dirty asphalt. I looked at the bus schedule on my phone. The next one was coming in 8 minutes. The stop was a half-mile walk. I started walking. I walked down the suburban street I had grown up on. Neighbors were out washing their cars or walking their dogs. Mr. Henderson, who lived 2 doors down, looked up from his garden bed. He saw me in my full regalia, walking alone, my gown billowing slightly in the humid breeze. He looked confused. He raised a hand to wave, but then dropped it, unsure of the protocol for witnessing a graduate abandoned by her own family. I kept my head up. I fixed my eyes on the horizon. The fabric of the gown was heavy, trapping my body heat. Sweat trickled down my spine. The tassel on my cap kept hitting me in the eye. When I reached the bus stop, there were 3 other people there, a woman with grocery bags, a man in construction gear, and a teenager with headphones. They all stared. Of course they stared. I looked ridiculous. I was dressed for a ceremony of high achievement, standing on a cracked sidewalk next to a trash can that overflowed with fast food wrappers. The bus arrived with a screech of air brakes. The doors hissed open. The driver, a large man with tired eyes, looked me up and down. Congratulations, he grunted as I tapped my pass. Thank you, I said. My voice sounded small. I moved to the back. The bus smelled of old vinyl and sanitizer. I sat near the window, gathering my gown around me so it wouldn't touch the sticky floor. As the bus lurched forward, I watched the city of Roanoke roll by. We passed strip malls and gas stations. We passed the high school where I had graduated 4 years ago, where my parents had skipped the ceremony because Kelsey had a minor dance recital the same evening. You are used to it. My father's voice echoed in my head. He was right. I was used to it. I was used to being the backup plan. I was used to being the low-maintenance asset. But being used to something did not mean it didn't burn. It just meant you built up scar tissue over the nerves so you could keep functioning. By the time I got to the Berglund Center, my feet were throbbing. The bus dropped me off 2 blocks away, and I had to navigate through the crowded sidewalks. It was a sea of families. Fathers carrying bouquets of roses, mothers holding balloons, grandparents moving slowly with canes, their faces beaming with pride. I saw a girl from my marketing class, Sarah. She was surrounded by at least 10 people. Her dad was hugging her so hard her cap was tilting off. They were laughing. I walked past them, keeping my gaze straight ahead. I was an island. I was a sovereign nation of one. I found the entrance for graduates. A security guard checked my ID. "Family meeting you inside?" he asked cheerfully. "They are already here," I lied. I made my way to the staging area. It was chaotic. Thousands of students in black gowns were milling around. Finding their alphabetical places, I found the Y section. Young, I took my place in line. I reached up to adjust my cap. I didn't have a mirror, so I used the reflection in a trophy case in the hallway. My hair was frizzy from the humidity. My makeup was slightly shiny. I took a deep breath and smoothed the front of my gown. "You did this," I whispered to the reflection. "You paid the tuition. You studied until 3 in the morning. You worked the double shifts. This is yours." The procession began. The music started. Pomp and circumstance. It is a cliché, but it works. It swells in your chest. We marched into the arena, a black river of students. The applause from the stands was a physical wave of sound. I scanned the crowd as I walked. The lights were bright, blinding. I couldn't see individual faces in the upper decks. I hoped they were there. I hoped they had found parking. I hoped Kelsey hadn't decided she was bored and made them leave. We sat down. The speeches dragged on. A local politician spoke about the future. The university president spoke about resilience. I tuned them out. I was focused on the piece of paper in my pocket, the small card with my name and phonetic pronunciation. Finally, it was time, row by row. We stood up. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was the finish line. This was the moment that validated every skipped party, every lonely weekend, every shift at the campus library. I walked up the stairs to the stage. The lights were incredibly hot. The dean stood there, shaking hands. I handed my card to the announcer. He was an older man with a deep baritone voice. He looked at the card. He paused. He looked at it again. Brooklyn Elizabeth Young. He boomed. I stepped forward. "Summa cum laude," he added. I heard a cheer from the student section. My friends, the people who actually knew me. And the announcer continued, "Not letting me walk away yet. Recipient of the Chancellor's Award for Excellence in Strategic Communication." The applause changed. It wasn't just polite clapping anymore. It was loud, sustained. This was the highest award the department gave. It came with a plaque and a recognition that I was the top student in my major. I walked across the stage, shaking the Chancellor's hand. He handed me the diploma cover and the heavy glass plaque. "Well done, Brooklyn," he said. "We expect great things." I turned to the audience. I shielded my eyes against the spotlights. And then, I saw them. They were in the lower section, near the front. Rick had sprung for good seats, probably to get better angles for photos. Rick was standing, but he wasn't cheering. He was holding his phone. But it was lowered to his chest. His mouth was slightly open. He looked confused. Mom was sitting next to him, her hands frozen mid-clap. She looked at Rick, then back at me, then back at Rick. Kelsey was looking at her phone. She hadn't even seen it, but Rick saw. I could see the gears turning in his head even from 50 yards away. He didn't know about summa cum laude. He didn't know about the Chancellor's Award. I hadn't told them. Why would I? They never asked how classes were going. They only asked when I could come home to walk the dog or help Kelsey with her taxes. For the first time in my life, I saw my father look at me not as a subordinate, but as a variable he hadn't accounted for. He looked shocked, and beneath the shock, there was something else. Fear. The fear of a man who realizes the horse he bet against just won the Triple Crown. I didn't smile at them. I didn't wave. I just held my plaque. looked him dead in the eye for 1 second, and walked off the stage. I sat back down, my heart racing. The adrenaline was crashing. I felt exhausted. 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting a congratulations, maybe an apology for the bus. It was a text from Rick. Meet us at the fountain outside. Immediately. No emoji, no exclamation point, just a command. It read like a summons to a disciplinary hearing, not a message to a daughter who had just been named top of her class. The ceremony ended 20 minutes later. I filed out with the rest of the graduates. The air outside was still heavy, but the sky had turned a bruising purple, threatening a storm. I walked toward the large concrete fountain in the plaza. The water was turned off for maintenance, so it was just a dry, ugly basin. I saw them. The white Mercedes was parked right on the curb, in a strictly enforced no parking zone. Hazard lights were flashing. It was a power move. Rick Young didn't search for parking spots. He created them. Rick was standing by the hood of the car. He was still wearing his khakis and a blue polo shirt. He held a thick manila envelope in his hand. He was tapping it rhythmically against his thigh. Mom stood a few feet behind him, looking anxious. Kelsey was in the passenger seat, applying lip gloss in the vanity mirror. Completely unbothered, I walked up to them. My gown billowed around me. I clutched my plaque to my chest like a shield. Rick didn't say hello. He didn't say congratulations. He didn't ask to see the award. He stepped forward, blocking my path to the sidewalk. He looked at the plaque, then up at my face. His expression was tight, his jaw set. "We need to talk," he said. He held up the manila envelope. "About your future, and how you are going to pay us back." I looked at the envelope. I looked at the gleaming white car behind him. And suddenly, the joy of the ceremony evaporated. The cold reality of my life rushed back in. But this time, it felt different. Because as I looked at the Mercedes, really looked at it, I noticed something. The dealer plate frame didn't match the dealership in town. It was from a luxury leasing agent in Cincinnati, where I had been accepted for my internship. A cold chill that had nothing to do with the weather went down my spine. "What is that?" I asked, pointing to the envelope. Rick smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "This," he said, "is the plan. Get in the car. Brooklyn. We have a lot of numbers to go over, to understand why I got into that white Mercedes with my father instead of walking away. You have to understand the architecture of my childhood. It was not a house built on abuse. There were no wire hangers, no screaming matches that woke the neighbors, no bruises hidden under long sleeves. If you looked at our split-level home in Roanoke from the street, you saw the American dream rendered in beige siding and perfectly trimmed boxwood hedges. We had 2 cars. We had a golden retriever named Buster. We had family dinners on Sundays. To the outside world, the Young family was a single, cohesive unit. But inside, there were 2 distinct ecosystems. There was the ecosystem that revolved around Kelsey, which was lush, attentive, and reactive to her every whim. And then there was the ecosystem where I lived, which was arid, functional, and largely uninhabited. It started with the physical pain. That is the first thing a child learns to measure, the exchange rate between their tears and their parents' attention. I was 8 years old. I was riding my bike down the steep hill behind the elementary school. I hit a patch of loose gravel and went down hard. The asphalt shredded the skin on my left knee and palms. I remember sitting there for a moment, the stinging sensation blooming into a throbbing ache, waiting for someone to run to me. But I was alone. I walked my bike home, blood trickling down my shin into my white sock. When I walked into the kitchen, my mother was on the phone. She looked at me, saw the blood, and held up a finger. 1 second. She mouthed. She finished her conversation, something about the PTA bake sale, before hanging up. She didn't gasp. She didn't rush to the cabinet for the peroxide. She pointed to the bathroom down the hall. "You know where the first aid kit is?" "Brooklyn," she said, her voice calm and practical. "Wash it out with soap first. It will sting, but you have to do it. Don't get blood on the carpet." I went to the bathroom. I washed the grit out of my own knee. I fumbled with the wrapper of the large adhesive bandage. I applied it myself. Smoothing down the edges, I felt proud. In a twisted way. I was a big girl. I could handle it. 2 weeks later, Kelsey, who was 6, got a paper cut, a literal paper cut from a coloring book. She screamed as if she had been stabbed. Rick dropped the newspaper. Mom dropped the spatula. They both rushed to her. Mom kissed the finger. Rick made a big show of examining the wound, declaring it a war injury, and carried her to the bathroom to pick out a Band-Aid with cartoon characters on it. Then they took her for ice cream because she had been so brave. I remember watching them leave from the living room window. I touched the scab on my knee under my jeans. I realized then that my pain was a logistical issue to be solved. While Kelsey's pain was an emotional event to be soothed, this dynamic hardened into a concrete law as we grew up. I became the designated easy child. My parents loved to tell their friends how low maintenance I was. Brooklyn? Oh, we never have to worry about her. Rick would say at backyard barbecues, holding a beer, she is rock solid, resilient. You could drop her in the middle of a forest and she would walk out with a map. He said it like a compliment. For years, I took it as one. I polished that word, resilient, like a trophy. I didn't realize that in the young household, resilient was just a synonym for neglected. It was a permission slip they signed for themselves to stop trying. Because I was capable of surviving without them, they decided I should. The inequality became most visible on birthdays and holidays. It wasn't that I didn't get gifts. I did, but there was a fundamental difference in the philosophy behind the giving. For my 12th birthday, I asked for a specific art set. It was expensive, the kind with professional grade pastels and charcoal. I wanted to create. On the morning of my birthday, I unwrapped a heavy box. It was a new winter coat, a high-quality, sensible, navy blue parka. You are going to need it for middle school, Mom said, beaming. It is waterproof and rated for 0 degrees. We got it at the end of season sale. Such a smart buy. I put on the coat. It was stiff and ugly. Thank you. I said. 2 months later, it was Kelsey's 10th birthday. She asked for a karaoke machine, a loud, impractical, plastic tower of noise. She got the karaoke machine, and a microphone stand, and a disco ball light for her room. We want her to express herself, Rick said, filming her as she shrieked and sang off key in the living room. She has so much personality. We have to nurture that spark. I sat on the couch, wearing my sensible coat because the heating was low, watching them nurture her spark while my own interests were dismissed as frivolous. I learned that my needs were things to be met with utility. Clothes, school supplies, dental checkups. Kelsey's wants were dreams to be invested in. By the time I reached high school, I had stopped asking for things. I got a job at the local library shelving books. I bought my own clothes at thrift stores. I paid for my own field trips. My parents didn't object. In fact, they seemed relieved. It freed up more resources, both financial and emotional, for Kelsey. Kelsey was struggling. They told me constantly. She had anxiety. She had trouble focusing. She needed tutors. She needed a life coach. She needed dance classes to build confidence. She needed horse riding lessons to learn responsibility. I had anxiety too. I had trouble focusing too. But when I brought home a report card with a B in chemistry, Rick didn't hire a tutor. He sat me down at the kitchen table and frowned. You are smarter than this. Brooklyn, he said, you just need to apply yourself. You are losing focus. That was it. No help. Just a demand for better output. The most painful moments, however, were the public ones, the school events. I was in the symphonic band. I played the clarinet. It wasn't the coolest activity, but I was good at it. First chair, in my junior year, we had the state competition. It was a big deal. We had practiced for months. The date was on the family calendar in the kitchen for 6 weeks, the morning of the competition. I came downstairs in my concert black uniform. Mom was rushing around the kitchen, packing a cooler. Rick was filling water bottles. Good luck today. Honey, Mom said, not looking at me. We feel terrible, but we can't make it. I froze. What? Kelsey has her travel soccer tryouts. Rick said, It is in Lynchburg. It starts at noon. Same time as your concert. We have to drive her, but you came to her practice game last week. I said, my voice was steady, but my hands were shaking. You haven't seen me play all year. Rick sighed. He gave me that look. The one that said I was being difficult. The one that said I was breaking the contract of being the easy child. Brooklyn, be reasonable. He said, This is a tryout. It determines her placement for the whole season. It is high stakes for her. You are just playing music. You know you are going to do fine. You don't need us staring at you to hit the right notes. You don't need us. I took the bus to the competition. I sat on the stage under the hot lights, surrounded by other students whose parents were waving from the audience with camcorders. When I played my solo, I played it perfectly. I played it with a cold, sharp anger that made the notes ring out clearer than they ever had before. When I looked out into the dark auditorium, I saw the empty block of seats where they should have been. I didn't cry. I just categorized it. Another piece of data. That was the year I became friends with Jade Parker. Jade was everything I wasn't. She was loud, opinionated, and observant. She sat across from me in a P English and noticed things that other people missed. One day at lunch, she was looking through my phone gallery. I was showing her a picture of Buster, my dog. She swiped too far and landed on a family photo from Thanksgiving. In the photo, Rick and Mom were leaning in toward Kelsey, who was sitting in the middle holding a pie. They were all smiling, physically touching, a tight triangle of affection. I was standing on the far edge of the frame, slightly out of focus, holding a serving spoon. There was a noticeable gap between my shoulder and my mother's arm. Jade stared at the photo for a long time. She zoomed in. Then she looked at me. You know this is weird, right? She asked. What? I asked, taking a bite of my apple. This? She pointed at the screen. You look like you are photobombing your own family. Do they even know you were there? I laughed. But it was a hollow sound. That is just how they are. Kelsey is the baby. They worry about her. Jade didn't laugh. She put the phone down on the cafeteria table. My brother is the baby, she said, but my parents don't treat me like the maid. You are always talking about how you have to get home to let the contractor in, or how you have to cook dinner because your mom is driving your sister to whatever. Do they ever do anything for you? I opened my mouth to defend them, to recite the script I had been given. They put a roof over my head. They are busy. I am independent. But the words died in my throat, because Jade was looking at me with something I wasn't used to. Indignation. She was angry on my behalf. It is not normal. Brooklyn, she said softly, you are not their employee. You are their daughter. I didn't answer her. I couldn't. Admitting she was right would mean admitting that the loneliness I felt every day was a deliberate choice my parents were making. It was safer to believe I was just being helpful, but the crack in the facade had appeared. And once you see the crack, you can't unsee it. The breaking point, or rather, the moment I stopped hoping for them to change, came 3 months before graduation. It was parent-teacher conference night. I didn't need them to come. My grades were perfect. I had already been accepted to Lakeview State University, but the school required a parent signature for some final senior year paperwork regarding honor roll recognition. Mom came alone. She looked harried, checking her watch constantly. Kelsey was in the car waiting. They were on their way to a shopping mall. I was sitting in the hallway, waiting for Jade. The door to Mr. Harrison's classroom was open. Mr. Harrison was my history teacher and one of the few adults who actually saw me. I heard his voice drift out into the hallway. Mrs. Young, Brooklyn is exceptional, he said. Truly. Her essay on the socio-political impact of the Great Depression was master's-level work. I hope you are encouraging her to apply for the big scholarships. She could go anywhere. I held my breath. I wanted to hear her say it. I wanted to hear her say, yes, we are so proud. There was a pause. Then I heard my mother's voice. It wasn't malicious. It was breezy, dismissive. Oh, that is nice to hear, she said. the sound of a zipper being pulled up on a purse. But honestly, we don't worry about Brooklyn. She is a machine. She is fine. She doesn't need much. We are really focusing our resources on Kelsey right now. She is the creative one. You know? Brooklyn is practical. She will figure it out. She always does. She will figure it out. I sat there on the cold linoleum floor of the hallway. The words hit me harder than the time I fell off my bike. She doesn't need much. It wasn't that they thought I was strong. It was that they thought I was empty. They didn't see a person with desires and dreams. They saw a self-sustaining organism that required zero maintenance, and because I cost them nothing, they valued me at nothing. I stood up. I walked away before my mother came out of the room. I didn't want her to see me. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of asking if I was okay, just so she could check good parenting off her list and run back to Kelsey. That was the night I stopped trying to earn their love. I started calculating my exit, but as I sat in the passenger seat of the Mercedes on graduation day, watching the scenery blur by, I realized I hadn't calculated one thing. I hadn't calculated that their neglect wasn't just emotional, it was financial, and it was about to get legal. Rick turned onto the highway, heading away from the restaurant district and toward the quiet industrial park where his office was located. "Dad," I said, "where are we going?" "Quiet. Brooklyn," he said, tapping the manila envelope on the steering wheel. "I am trying to think about how to phrase this so you understand the opportunity I'm giving you." Opportunity. Whenever Rick Young used that word, it meant someone was about to get screwed, and it usually wasn't him. We pulled into the parking lot of a deserted office building. He put the car in park. The silence in the cabin was heavy, suffocating, and smelled of new car leather. He turned in his seat to face me. He didn't look like a father. He looked like a loan shark collecting on a debt I didn't know I had signed. "You think you are so smart with your fancy degree?" he said, his voice low. "But you don't know anything about the real world. You think that scholarship covered everything? You think you lived for free for 4 years?" He tossed the envelope into my lap. It was heavy. "Open it," he commanded. I opened the clasp. Inside were stacks of papers, bank statements, withdrawal slips, and right on top, a spreadsheet with my name on it, tallying up a sum that made my stomach turn over. "You owe us, Brooklyn," he said. "And since you have that big job in Cincinnati lined up, we figured out a payment plan." I looked at the first figure on the page. It wasn't a repayment plan. It was a ransom note. If you tracked the financial history of the Young household during my high school years on a graph, you would see 2 lines moving in opposite directions. The line representing the investment in Kelsey soared upward, like a tech stock in a bubble. The line representing the investment in me flattened out, hugging the x-axis, strictly covering the cost of keeping a human being alive and legally enrolled in the public school system. It was not just about favoritism anymore. It was about economics. By the time I was 16, the disparity had moved from emotional neglect to hard currency. I watched the delivery trucks pull up to our driveway 3 or 4 times a week. They brought packages with branding from Sephora, Nordstrom, and boutiques I could not pronounce. Kelsey would tear them open on the kitchen island, discarding the cardboard while Mom cooed over the fabrics. "It is for her image," Mom would say, folding a cashmere sweater that cost $300. "You know how important presentation is at her age. She is building a personal brand. I was building a resume, but apparently, that did not require funding." The most humiliating conversation of my life happened at that same kitchen island during the fall of my senior year. I had spent weeks researching universities. I had my heart set on programs with strong communication departments. I had filled out the Common App. I just needed one thing to hit submit. I needed $75. It was a Tuesday night. Rick was going over the monthly budget on his laptop. He liked to do this, performative accountancy, to show us how hard he worked to keep the lights on. "Dad," I said, sliding a printed sheet of paper toward him, "I need to pay the application fee for Lakeview State. It is $75. The deadline is Friday." Rick stopped typing. He took off his reading glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked at the paper as if it were a citation for a parking violation. $75, he repeated. For one school? It is my top choice, I said. They have a great media program. Rick sighed. He leaned back in his chair. The leather creaking. Brooklyn. We have talked about this. You need to be realistic. Application fees add up. If you apply to 5 schools, that is almost $400. That is groceries for a week. He gestured to the refrigerator, which was currently stocked with organic berries and premium steaks for Kelsey's new diet. Why don't you look at the community college here in Roanoke? He suggested. It is free to apply. You do 2 years there. Save us the room and board. And then transfer. It is the logical move. It wasn't about logic. It was about resource allocation. Every dollar spent on my potential was a dollar not spent on Kelsey's certainty. But I have the grades, I argued. My GPA is 3.9. I want to go to a 4-year university. Rick put his glasses back on. Look, if you want to throw money away on lottery tickets, that is your business. But I'm not funding a pipe dream. You are the practical one. Brooklyn, be practical. I stood there, my hand hovering over the paper. The message was clear. They were not betting on me. 2 days later, I came home to find the living room transformed. There was a professional lighting rig set up in the corner. A ring light the size of a tractor tire stood next to a backdrop of faux ivy. Kelsey was sitting in front of it, testing out a new camera that I knew cost at least $1,200. What is this? I asked, dropping my backpack. Rick was beaming. He was adjusting the tripod. Kelsey is launching her channel, he announced. She is going to be a fashion and lifestyle influencer. We are getting her the right tools. You have to spend money to make money, right? I looked at the $1,200 camera. Then I thought about the $75 I didn't have. That afternoon, I walked to the public library. I didn't go to study. I went to the circulation desk and asked Mrs. Gable if they were hiring pages. They were minimum wage, 10 hours a week. I took the job. I also started babysitting for the Millers down the street on Friday and Saturday nights. I stopped eating lunch in the cafeteria to save the $3.50 a day. I became a hoarder of small change. Every dime I earned went into a shoebox in the back of my closet, buried under my winter sweaters. I paid my own application fees. I wrote the checks myself, feeling a grim satisfaction as I signed my name. This period of my life was defined by the sound of Rick's voice preaching 2 different sermons. To Kelsey, he preached potential. You have the look. Kels, he would tell her over dinner. You have that star quality. We just need to get you in front of the right people. To me, he preached logistics. How are you getting to that campus? He would ask when I mentioned a school in Virginia Beach. Gas is $3 a gallon. Have you calculated the depreciation on your car? You should stay local. It makes sense. He talked about my future like it was a supply chain problem he wanted to outsource. He didn't care if I was happy or successful. He just wanted me to be solvent enough that I wouldn't ask him for money later. I was the hedge against Kelsey's risk. If her influencer career didn't take off, he needed to make sure I wasn't another drain on the account. I might have drowned in that house if it hadn't been for Jade Parker. Jade was the only person who looked at my life and didn't see a good, independent kid. She saw a hostage situation. One afternoon in the school library, I was making a list of colleges. I had crossed out Lakeview State and was looking at the local community college website. Just like Rick wanted. I was tired. I was tired of fighting for $75. Jade snatched the notebook out of my hand. What are you doing? She demanded. Being realistic, I said, quoting my father. She ripped the page out of the notebook, crumpled it into a ball, and threw it into the recycling bin. You are not going to community college, she said firmly. You are summa cum laude material. We are going to find you the money. Jade sat with me for 3 weeks straight. We didn't just look for colleges. We hunted for scholarships like we were searching for buried treasure. We found grants for women in communications. We found essay contests. We found a scholarship for students with high GPAs from rural Virginia. She edited my essays. She cut out all the passive voice. Stop writing like you are apologizing for existing. She told me, stabbing her red pen at a paragraph where I explained my financial need. Write it like you are the best investment they will ever make. I rewrote it. I wrote about working in the library. I wrote about the disconnect between the image of my family and the reality of my bank account. I didn't use names, but I poured the frustration onto the page. When I received the large envelope from Lakeview State University in April, I didn't open it in front of my parents. I drove to Jade's house. We sat on her front porch swing. "You do it," I said, my hands shaking. Jade tore the envelope open. She pulled out the heavy cream-colored paper. She scanned it, and then she screamed, "Full tuition," she yelled, shaking the paper. "Presidential scholarship. Brooklyn, you are going to Ohio." I grabbed the letter. It was true. 4 years of tuition, fully covered. But then I read the fine print. Room, board, and fees are the responsibility of the student. It was thousands of dollars a year, but it was a start. I drove home, feeling lighter than I had in years. I walked into the kitchen. Rick and Mom were drinking wine. Kelsey was on her phone, editing a photo of her avocado toast. I got into Lakeview. I said, "And I got the presidential scholarship. It covers full tuition." Rick looked up. He took a sip of his wine. He didn't jump up. He didn't hug me. He did mental math. "Full tuition?" he asked. "Yes, every penny of the classes." "Well, that is good," he said, nodding slowly. "That saves us a lot of headaches. It would have been tight keeping you here if we had to pay for credits." That was it. Not, "We are proud of you," just "good. That balances the ledger," Mom chimed in. "But who is paying for the dorms? And the meal plan? We are stretching it as it is, with Kelsey's brand launch coming up. She needs a website designer. I have some savings," I said, my voice hardening. "And I will get a job on campus." Rick shrugged. "As long as you have a plan, just don't expect us to bail you out if you run short. We are heavily leveraged right now with your sister's career." Her career, at that point, her career consisted of 300 followers and a closet full of clothes she had worn once. I made the decision that night. I was going to Cincinnati. It was 6 hours away. It was far enough that they couldn't ask me to come home on a Tuesday to walk the dog. It was close enough to drive, but far enough to be a new world. The summer before I left was a blur of work. I took double shifts at the library. I mowed lawns. I practically lived at the Miller's house, watching their toddlers. 2 weeks before I was set to leave, I needed to consolidate my money. I had checks from graduation gifts, mostly from distant relatives who didn't know the family dynamic, and my earnings from the summer. I walked into the local branch of the bank where my parents had opened a savings account for me when I was 10. It was one of those junior savers accounts. I hadn't looked at it in years, just blindly depositing checks whenever I got them. I walked up to the teller, a nice woman named Brenda. "I am moving to college." I said, "I want to check my balance and maybe transfer this to a checking account with a debit card." Brenda typed my name into the computer. "Okay. Brooklyn," she said. "I see the account here. Joint savings. Primary holder, Rick Young. Secondary holder, Brooklyn Young." I froze. "Joint?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "Since you were a minor when it was opened, your father is on the account." I felt a prickle of unease. I had turned 18 in May. "Can I take him off?" I asked. "Now that I am 18? Brenda frowned at the screen. "Technically, yes, but since he is the primary custodian, he usually has to sign off on the release. Or you can just close this one and open a new one." I hesitated. If I closed it, the bank would send a notification to the address on file. My parents' house. Rick would ask why I was moving money. He would get offended. He would give me a lecture about trust and family and how I was being paranoid. I didn't have the energy for the fight. I looked at the balance. $4,000. It was every cent I had to my name. It was my deposit for the dorm. It was my textbooks. "It is fine." I told Brenda, "Just leave it. I will open a checking account in Cincinnati and transfer it later." I thought I was being practical. I thought I was avoiding unnecessary drama. I didn't know I was leaving the door to my life unlocked. And I had just handed the burglar a map. I left the bank with a receipt showing my balance, feeling secure. I went home and packed my life into 3 cardboard boxes and my beat-up sedan. When I said goodbye in the driveway, Rick didn't cry. He checked the tires on my car. "Keep your phone on," he said. "And remember, money is tight. Don't spend it on stupid things." I drove away, watching them in the rearview mirror. They turned back to the house before I had even reached the stop sign. Kelsey was already holding her phone up, probably filming a "so sad my sister is leaving" story for her followers. I turned onto the highway, pointing my car west toward Ohio. I thought I had escaped. I thought the distance would protect me. I didn't realize that in the digital age, you can rob someone without ever stepping foot in their room. And my father, the man who preached logistics and responsibility, had the keys to the only thing that kept me safe. 4 years later, standing at the fountain with my diploma, I would remember that moment at the bank. I would remember Brenda asking if I wanted to close the account, and I would wish, with every fiber of my being, that I had listened to the paranoia instead of the guilt. But back then, I was just a girl driving to Cincinnati, thinking the hard part was over. I was wrong. The extraction was just beginning. The transition to Lakeview State University was not the cinematic montage of freedom I had secretly hoped for. There were no slow-motion shots of me throwing my cap in the air or laughing with new friends on a sun-drenched quad. My arrival in Cincinnati was gray, wet, and smelled of diesel fumes. I dragged my 2 suitcases up the 3 flights of stairs to my dorm room. One wheel on the larger suitcase was broken, creating a rhythmic thud-drag-thud sound that echoed in the stairwell. I unpacked my life in 40 minutes. My clothes went into the narrow closet. My textbooks, bought used and highlighted by strangers, went onto the desk. And then, I taped the most important document I owned to the wall above my bed. It was not a poster of a band. It was a spreadsheet. I had mapped out every single dollar I needed to survive the semester. Tuition was covered by the scholarship, but the dorm room, the meal plan, the books, and the mandatory student fees were not. I had $4,000 in that joint savings account back home. But I was terrified to touch it unless it was an absolute emergency. I treated that money like a nuclear code. It was only to be used if the world was ending. So, I worked. I did not have the luxury of the typical college experience, while my roommates were rushing sororities or planning toga parties. I was clocking in. My life became a blur of fluorescent lights and time cards. Job number 1 was in the campus mailroom. I started at 6 in the morning. For 3 hours every day, I sorted letters and packages into hundreds of small metal boxes. My hands were constantly dry and covered in paper cuts. I learned to hate the smell of cardboard. Job number 2 was the IT help desk at the library. This was the skilled labor. I sat behind a high counter from 5 in the evening until 10 at night, helping panicked freshmen reset their passwords or figure out why their printer was jammed. It was mostly sitting and waiting, staring at a screen until my eyes burned. Job number 3 was the weekend shift. I drove for a food delivery app using my beat-up sedan. I spent my Friday and Saturday nights driving tacos and pizzas to parties I wasn't invited to. My car permanently smelled like pepperoni and old grease. I would drop off 5 boxes of pizza at a house where music was blasting, watch the students stumble to the door laughing and holding red cups, and then I would walk back to my car, check the app, and see that I had made $4.50 on the trip. I was existing in a state of perpetual exhaustion. My body was just a vehicle for moving between obligations. I slept in 4-hour bursts. I ate granola bars because they were cheap and portable. I drank coffee that tasted like battery acid because I couldn't afford the $4 lattes everyone else carried. The isolation was the hardest part. It wasn't that I didn't like people. It was that I couldn't afford to be around them. Socializing cost money. Going to the movies cost money. Even sitting in the campus coffee shop required buying something. So I stayed in the free spaces, the library, the mailroom, the driver's seat of my car. I watched the rituals of other students like an anthropologist studying a different species. The most painful ritual was the care package. Every week in the mailroom, I sorted dozens of boxes marked with bright stickers: fragile, love, mom, good luck on finals. I would slide the slip into the student's mailbox, and later, they would come running in, excited. They would tear open the boxes right there in the lobby. Homemade cookies, gift cards to Target, new sweaters, notes written in colorful markers saying, "We are so proud of you." I never got a package. The only things that landed in my mailbox were flyers for credit cards and official notices from the bursar's office reminding me of upcoming fee deadlines. My phone would buzz with emails. Subject: payment reminder. Subject: textbook rental due. Subject: insufficient funds. I would read them, calculate the hours I needed to drive to cover them, and get back to work. I became hard. I became efficient. I stopped feeling sorry for myself because pity didn't pay the rent. It was a Tuesday in November when the trajectory of my life shifted. It was raining. A cold, miserable Ohio rain that soaked through your coat and chilled your bones. I was working the closing shift at the IT help desk. The library was mostly empty, just a few desperate souls cramming for midterms in the corners. The hum of the computer towers was hypnotic. I was reading a textbook for my data storytelling class, highlighting a section on visual rhetoric, when I heard a slam. It came from the row of computers dedicated to visitors and alumni. I stood up and looked over the counter. A woman was sitting there, her head in her hands. She looked polished, even in her distress. She was wearing a tailored charcoal blazer and a silk scarf that looked expensive. A leather briefcase sat on the floor next to her. She let out a groan of pure frustration. "Is everything okay, ma'am?" I asked, walking out from behind the counter. She looked up. She was in her early 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that were currently wide with panic. "No," she said, her voice tight. "Everything is not okay. My laptop just died. Completely black. I have a keynote presentation at 8 tomorrow morning for the Chamber of Commerce. My entire slide deck is on there." "Did you save it to the cloud?" I asked, the standard IT question. She laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "I was trying to. The Wi-Fi here is spotty, and then the screen just went dark. I think the battery surged or something. I don't know. I am a strategist, not a technician." She looked at the black screen as if it were a tombstone. "Let me take a look," I said. I sat down in the chair next to her. I wasn't a computer engineer, but I had spent 3 months troubleshooting every possible issue a laptop could have. I pressed the power button. Nothing. I checked the charging port. It looked loose. "I think your battery is drained and the port is not connecting." I said, "Do you have a backup drive?" "No," she said. "Okay, I'm going to try a hard boot." I held down the power button and 2 other keys simultaneously, a trick I had learned on a Reddit forum for this specific brand of laptop. I held it for 30 seconds. The woman held her breath. Suddenly, the screen flickered. The manufacturer logo appeared. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Wait," I said. "It is booting in safe mode. We need to get the file off immediately before it dies again." I pulled a flash drive out of my pocket, I always carried one, and plugged it in. The desktop loaded, the icons pixelated and large. I navigated to her recent files. There it was. Cincinnati_growth_strategy_final, PPTX. I dragged it to my drive. The progress bar crawled across the screen. We both watched it like it was a bomb countdown. 90%. 95. Done. I pulled the drive out just as the screen went black again. I held the small silver stick up. "I got it," I said. The woman slumped back in her chair, exhaling a breath she seemed to have been holding for 10 minutes. She looked at me. Really looked at me. For the first time. She took in my worn-out university hoodie, my messy bun, the dark circles under my eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. "You just saved my life," she said, or at least, my reputation. I handed her the drive. "Just doing my job." She took the drive but didn't put it away. She kept looking at me. "You are a student here?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am, junior." "What are you studying?" "Communication and data storytelling." I said automatically. She raised an eyebrow. That is a specific combination. Why that? Because numbers lie if you don't give them context, I said, and stories are just fluff if you don't have the data to back them up. I want to bridge the gap. It was the answer I had rehearsed for interviews. But I said it with the conviction of someone who had lived it. I knew exactly how data could be manipulated. I lived in a family where the data said we were fine. But the story was that I was invisible. The woman smiled. It was a genuine smile, sharp and appreciative. "I am Simone Archer," she said, extending a hand. "Archer and Vale Studio." I shook her hand. Her grip was firm. I knew the name. Archer Vale was one of the top boutique branding agencies in the Midwest. They handled the big accounts, hospital systems, tech startups, city revitalization projects. "I am Brooklyn Young." I said. "Well, Brooklyn Young," Simone said, standing up and smoothing her blazer. "You are calm under pressure. You solve problems without panicking. And you understand the intersection of data and narrative." She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a business card. It was thick, matte black with silver lettering. "We are looking for interns for the spring semester," she said. "Usually, I filter them through HR, and I get a pile of kids who want to make TikToks. I need someone who can actually think." She handed me the card. "It is paid," she added. $15 an hour, plus course credit." I stared at the card. $15 an hour. That was double what I made at the mailroom. It was triple what I made delivering pizza on a bad night. "You should apply," she said. "Send your resume directly to my email. Use the subject line, laptop savior." She picked up her dead laptop and slid it into her bag. "Thank you. Brooklyn, get some sleep. You look like you need it." She walked out of the library, the heels of her boots clicking on the tile floor. I sat there for a long time, holding the black card. The library was silent again, save for the hum of the servers. $15 an hour. It wasn't a fortune, but to me, it was a lifeline. It was the difference between eating granola bars and eating a vegetable. It was the difference between drowning and treading water. I packed up my things and walked back to my dorm in the rain. I didn't feel the cold this time. I felt a strange, vibrating energy in my chest. When I got to my room, I sat at my desk. My roommates were asleep. I turned on my desk lamp, shielding the light with a book so I wouldn't wake them. I opened my laptop. I pulled up the Archer Vale website. It was sleek, modern, intimidating. The work they did was incredible. It was the kind of work I wanted to do. I started typing my cover letter. I didn't write the standard fluff. I wrote about efficiency. I wrote about solving problems in real time. I wrote with the voice of someone who had been managing logistics since she was 12 years old. But as I moved the mouse to attach my resume, a voice echoed in my head. It wasn't my voice. It was Rick's. "Don't get your hopes up. Brooklyn, you are aiming too high. You are a worker bee, not a queen. Stick to what is practical. Stick to the mailroom. You are used to the grunt work." I hesitated. My finger hovered over the trackpad. The doubt was a physical weight. It was the accumulation of 18 years of being told I was the backup plan. Who was I to think I could work at a place like Archer Vale? I was the girl with the broken suitcase and the secondhand coat. I was the girl who took the bus. I looked at the spreadsheet taped to the wall. I looked at the line item for rent that was currently in the red. I thought about the Mercedes my father had bought my sister. I thought about the investment they made in her, while I was scraping by on delivering pizzas. I wasn't doing this for them. I was doing this to get away from them. I gritted my teeth. I am not the backup plan. I whispered to the empty room. I hit send. The screen flashed. Application submitted. I sat back in my chair, listening to the rain hit the window. I didn't know it then, but I had just fired the first shot in a war I didn't even know I was fighting, and Simone Archer was about to give me the weapon I needed to win. The interview process at Archer and Vale was not what I expected. I was used to begging for minimum wage jobs, where the manager looked at my class schedule with disdain, acting as if my desire to get an education was a personal inconvenience to their shift rotation. I walked into the interview with Simone ready to apologize for my existence. I sat in a glass-walled conference room that overlooked the Cincinnati skyline. I had printed my resume on the library printer, and the ink was slightly streaky. Simone sat across from me, along with the HR director. They did not ask me what my greatest weakness was. They did not ask me where I saw myself in 5 years. Simone placed my resume on the table. "You are working 3 jobs," she stated. It was not a question. "Yes," I said, "mailroom, IT desk, and delivery driving, and you are maintaining a 3.9 GPA. She added, "Yes." "How?" she asked. I blinked. "I do not sleep much, and I am efficient." I did not tell her about the granola bars or the spreadsheet on my wall. I told her the truth about my time management. I explained how I listened to audiobooks for my theory classes while I was driving pizzas. I explained how I used the downtime at the IT desk to code my data projects. I laid my life out not as a sob story, but as a logistical feat. Simone nodded. She looked at the HR director. "We can work around her class schedule," she said. "I want her on the strategy team, 20 hours a week, starting at $18 an hour." I froze. $18. That was more than my father made when he started his first job. "And," Simone continued, looking at me, "if we are paying you for your brain, we need you sharp. That means you quit the delivery driving. You cannot analyze data if you are falling asleep at the keyboard." I walked out of that building feeling like I was floating, for the first time in my life. Someone had looked at my struggle and seen value, not just convenience. My first day at Archer & Vale was a culture shock. I showed up 15 minutes early. Wearing a blazer I had found at a consignment shop, I was terrified. I expected to be handed a coffee order. I expected to be told to organize the supply closet. Instead, the office manager, a kind woman named Elena, showed me to a desk, a real desk. It had a dual monitor setup, an ergonomic chair, and a nameplate that read, "Brooklyn Young, Junior Analyst. There is a team meeting at 10. Elena said, "Grab a notebook." I went to the meeting. It was held in the main war room, a space dominated by whiteboards covered in flowcharts and sticky notes. There were 10 people there, writers, designers, strategists. Nobody asked me to get them water. Nobody handed me their trash. Simone introduced me simply. "This is Brooklyn. She is joining the data team. She is going to help us figure out why the Omnitech campaign is bleeding money." She pointed to the screen. Omnitech was a high-end home security system that Archer & Vale had been trying to market to suburban families. The campaign was sleek. The visuals were beautiful, and the sales were abysmal. Drew Vale, the other co-founder, was pacing at the front of the room. Drew was different from Simone. Where she was sharp and intuitive, he was academic and critical. He was a tall man with wire-rimmed glasses who looked like he corrected grammar for fun. "The metrics are nonsense," Drew said, gesturing to a graph. "We are targeting the right demographic, dual-income households, suburban zip codes, high anxiety about crime. They should be buying this. Why aren't they?" The room was silent. The senior strategists offered theories. The price point was too high. The color palette was too aggressive. The tagline wasn't catchy enough. Drew shot them all down. I sat in the back, looking at the user feedback logs on my tablet. I had spent the last hour reading through hundreds of customer service tickets. The boring, repetitive data that most people skimmed over. I raised my hand. I didn't mean to. It was a reflex from class. Drew stopped pacing. He looked at me. He looked like he had forgotten I was there. "Yes? The intern?" he said. I cleared my throat. My heart was hammering. But I remembered what Simone had said. "We are paying you for your brain." "It is not the price," I said. "It is the installation." Drew frowned. "What?" I scrolled through the logs. I have been reading the chat transcripts from the people who returned the product. I explained, 60% of the returns aren't because it is too expensive. They are because the installation requires drilling into brick or siding. And most of the target demographic are not DIY experts, or they live in HOA communities that prohibit exterior modification. I looked up at the room. The ads show a dad easily installing it in 5 minutes. I continued. But the reality is, people are opening the box, seeing a masonry drill bit, and freaking out. We are selling them safety, but we are delivering a construction project. They feel incompetent before they even turn it on. There was a silence in the room. It lasted for 5 seconds, which felt like 5 years. I waited for Drew to tell me I was wrong. I waited for him to tell me to stay in my lane. This was how it worked at home. If I pointed out a flaw in Rick's logic, I was being difficult. Drew walked over to the screen. He pulled up the installation manual. He looked at it. Then he looked at Simone. She is right, he said. He turned back to me. His expression wasn't warm, but it was respectful. It was the look of a mechanic acknowledging another mechanic who had found the leak. "What is the fix?" Drew asked me. "Change the messaging," I said, feeling a surge of confidence I had never felt before. Partner with a local handyman service. Offer white glove installation for an extra $50. Or pivot the marketing to emphasize the indoor, drill-free units until you can redesign the mount. Stop making the customer feel stupid. Simone smiled. It was a small, terrifyingly proud smile. Drew nodded once. "Good catch, young." He turned back to the whiteboard and started erasing the previous strategy. That afternoon, I went to the break room to get a water. Drew was there, making an espresso. I tried to make myself invisible, hugging the wall. "You have a good eye for the blind spots," he said without turning around. "Thank you," I said. "Most people look at the data they want to see," he said, turning to face me. "They fall in love with their own product. You looked at the friction points. Why?" I hesitated. I couldn't tell him that I was an expert on friction points because I had spent my entire life trying to avoid creating friction in my own home. I couldn't tell him that I knew exactly what it felt like to be sold a promise of family, only to find out the installation instructions required a version of me that didn't exist. "I am just practical," I said. Drew took a sip of his espresso. "Practical is the most expensive commodity we have," he said. "Keep it up." That month, my life changed. I quit the delivery app. I kept the library job for the quiet study time. But I stopped driving pizzas. I started sleeping 6 hours a night. I bought vegetables. I bought a pair of shoes that didn't have a hole in the sole. For the first time. I looked at my bank account and saw the number going up. Not hovering near zero. But more importantly, I looked at my time and saw value. At Archer and Vale. My hours were billable when I worked on a project. That time was charged to the client at a premium rate. I began to understand that my energy was a finite resource, and it had a market price. This realization made the silence from my family even louder. I had been in Cincinnati for 3 months. I had not received a single phone call asking how I was settling in. I checked my phone logs just to be sure. Nothing. The only communication I received was a text from my mother on a Tuesday afternoon. "Hey honey, what are your dates for Christmas break? We need to know when you will be back to watch Buster. The Millers invited us to their cabin in Aspen and we want to take Kelsey for the skiing. It would be a great photo op for her." I stared at the screen. They weren't asking if I wanted to come to Aspen. They weren't asking if I had plans. They were assuming I would come back to Roanoke, sit in an empty house, and feed the dogs so they could invest in Kelsey's image. I calculated the cost. The gas to drive home, the lost wages from not working over the break, the emotional toll of being the servant in my own house. I typed a reply. "I am not coming home for Christmas. I have to work. The agency is busy." I hit send before I could panic. 3 dots appeared. Then they disappeared. Then they appeared again. "Oh, okay. We will have to hire a sitter then. That is expensive. Brooklyn, are you sure?" "I am sure." I wrote. I put the phone down. I felt sick, but also strangely powerful. I had just set a boundary. I had just told them that my time was not free. The fallout was minimal, which hurt in its own way. They didn't beg me to come home because they missed me. They were just annoyed they had to pay a kennel. They solved the logistical problem and moved on. I threw myself into the work. I became the first one in the office and the last one to leave. I absorbed everything Simone and Drew taught me. I learned about brand positioning, crisis management, and data visualization. I built a portfolio of case studies. I was becoming someone else, or maybe I was finally becoming myself. One rainy afternoon in March, I was sitting at my desk, deep in a spreadsheet for a new client, a regional coffee chain. My email notification pinged. I expected it to be from a client or a professor. I looked at the sender name. Paige Morgan. I blinked. Aunt Paige. Paige was my mother's younger sister. I didn't know her well. She lived in Chicago and only came to Roanoke for major holidays. She was the cool aunt, single, a corporate lawyer, sharp-tongued, in the ecosystem of my family. She was a neutral observer. She never participated in the fawning over Kelsey, but she never intervened on my behalf either. She just watched, sipping her wine, her eyes tracking the dynamics like a surveillance camera. I opened the email. Subject: In town, Brooklyn. I am in Cincinnati for a deposition this week. I saw on LinkedIn that you are working at Archer & Vale. Impressive. That is a serious shop. I am staying at the Cincinnati Hotel. If you have a free hour, I would like to buy you coffee. Real coffee. Not the dorm water you're probably drinking. Let me know. Paige. I stared at the screen. Aunt Paige wanted to see me? Without my parents? I felt a flash of suspicion. Was she a spy? Had Rick sent her to check up on me, to see if I was actually working or just partying? Or was she going to guilt-trip me about Christmas? But then I remembered the way she used to look at me across the Thanksgiving table. It wasn't pity, it was recognition. I replied, I can meet you tomorrow at 5. I spent the next 24 hours nervous. When I walked into the lobby of the Cincinnati Hotel, I felt like I was walking into a trap. Paige was sitting in a velvet armchair, reading a file on a tablet. She looked impeccable in a navy suit. She saw me and waved. Brooklyn, she said, standing up. She didn't hug me. She shook my hand. Firmly. You look tired, she said, scanning my face. But you also look solid. Better than the last time I saw you. I sat down. I am good. I said, busy. She ordered us coffee and a tower of pastries. She didn't ask about school. She asked about the agency. She asked about Simone Archer. She knew who she was. Simone is a shark, Paige said approvingly. If she hired you, you must have teeth. I smiled. I am growing them. Paige took a sip of her coffee. She put the cup down and looked at me. Her expression shifted. The corporate mask dropped a fraction. I didn't just come here for the deposition. She said. I tensed. Here it comes. The message from Mom. The request for money. The guilt trip. I wanted to see you away from the circus. She said. The circus? Your house. She clarified. The Kelsey Show. Starring Rick and Linda as the producers and you as the stagehand. I stared at her. I had never heard anyone say it out loud. It was like hearing a secret language spoken for the first time. I follow your sister on Instagram, Paige said, her voice dry. I see the car, I see the shopping sprees, and I see that you are never in the pictures. I look down at my coffee. I am busy. Don't give me the corporate line. Brooklyn, Paige said softly. I am a lawyer. I know a deflection when I hear one. She leaned forward. I want to tell you something, and I need you to listen, because your parents will never tell you this. My heart started to race. What? Paige looked around the lobby to make sure no one was listening. Your father called me last week, she said. He was bragging about Kelsey's new business venture. Some boutique line she is launching. He is pouring capital into it. Serious capital. I nodded. I know. They invest in her. Paige narrowed her eyes. He didn't just say he was investing. Brooklyn, he said the family was all in. He mentioned that they were restructuring some assets to ensure liquidity. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. I don't know what assets he's talking about, she said, but I know your dad. He is a gambler who thinks he is an investor. And when he runs out of his own chips, he starts looking for other people's stacks. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small notepad. She wrote something on it and slid it across the marble table. Check your credit report, she whispered. I looked at the paper. It just said Equifax, TransUnion, Experian. Why? I asked, my voice trembling. Because, Paige said, her eyes sad but hard, Blind spots are dangerous. Brooklyn, you are good at finding them for your clients. Make sure you don't have one in your own backyard. She sat back. They see you as a resource. Brooklyn, not a person, and resources are meant to be used. I left the hotel an hour later. The rain had started again. I walked back to my dorm, clutching the piece of paper in my pocket. Check your credit report. I got back to my room. My roommate was watching TV. I ignored her and opened my laptop. I had never checked my credit score. I was 20 years old. I assumed I had no credit. I had no credit cards. I had no loans other than the student loans that were deferred. I navigated to a free credit report site. I typed in my social security number, my address, my date of birth. I hit enter. The wheel spun. I thought about the Junior Saver account. I thought about the Mercedes. I thought about the way Rick had said, "You don't need much." The screen refreshed. I stared at the number, and then I stared at the list of open accounts under my name. My hands went cold. The formatting of the page was clean, professional, and terrifying. Total debt, $42,000. I didn't have $42,000 of debt. I clicked on the details. There was a car loan, opened 6 months ago. There was a credit card, maxed out. There was a personal line of credit, all opened in Roanoke, Virginia, all co-signed or opened using my information as the primary guarantor. I sat there, the blue light of the screen illuminating my face. Aunt Paige was right. They hadn't just forgotten me. They had cannibalized me. I wasn't just the backup plan. I was the bank. The glowing blue numbers on my laptop screen burned into my retinas. $42,000. That was the price tag my parents had secretly attached to my identity. I sat in the dark of my dorm room, staring at the credit report until the battery warning flashed on my screen. I did not cry. Crying implies a sudden burst of emotion, a reaction to a shock. This was not a shock. It was a confirmation. It was the final data point in a trend line I had been tracking since I was 8 years old. I thought back to the conversation with Aunt Paige in the hotel lobby earlier that afternoon. I had been so focused on her warning about the finances that I had almost missed the other part of what she said, the part that cut deeper than the money. We had been finishing our coffee. Paige had looked at me with a mixture of pity and frustration. "You know," she had said, leaning in close. "Last Thanksgiving, after you stayed at school to work, Rick gave a toast. He talked for 10 minutes about Kelsey's resilience in navigating her gap year. He called her a warrior." I had gripped my coffee cup tighter. "And me?" I asked. Paige sighed. "Someone asked about you, Uncle Ted. I think—" Rick just waved his hand in the air, like he was swatting away a fly. He said, "Brooklyn is doing some computer thing at school. She is fine. She is always fine. She is doing some computer thing." I was working at one of the premier branding agencies in the Midwest. I was analyzing consumer behavior for Fortune 500 companies. I was maintaining a near-perfect GPA, but to him, I was just doing some computer thing. Paige had reached across the table and touched my hand. "Do not let their blindness make you doubt your own eyes. Brooklyn," she had said, "they have rewritten reality to suit their narrative. In their story, Kelsey is the protagonist who needs saving, and you are the background character who needs nothing. Do not accept that role." Now, sitting in my room with the evidence of their theft staring back at me, I realized Paige was right. They didn't see me. They only saw a resource, and you do not ask a resource for permission before you use it. You just mine it until it is empty. I closed my laptop. I did not call them immediately. I did not scream. I did what Simone Archer would do. I gathered intelligence. I downloaded every statement, every transaction record, every credit inquiry. I organized them into a folder named Evidence. I needed to know exactly how much they had taken before I made my move. For the next 3 days, I went to work. I sat in strategy meetings. I built slide decks. I smiled at clients. But inside, I was cold. I felt like a spy operating behind enemy lines. Every time my phone rang, I expected it to be them. It happened on a Thursday. I was at the agency, sitting in the break room, eating a salad I had actually paid for with my own money. My phone buzzed on the table. Dad. I stared at the name. My heart did a traitorous little jump, a reflex of fear and obedience that 20 years of conditioning had installed in me. I took a deep breath. I let it ring 3 times. Then I picked up. "Hello?" I said. My voice was steady. There was no greeting. No, "Hi, Brooklyn." No, "How are you doing?" "I heard you're doing some marketing stuff now," Rick said. His voice was casual, breezy, as if we had spoken yesterday and not 4 months ago. He sounded like he was calling to order a pizza. "I work in data strategy." "Dad," I said, correcting him. Right, marketing," he said, dismissing the distinction. "Look, the timing is actually perfect. We are finally ready to pull the trigger on Kelsey's brand, the boutique, Velvet Vine." He paused, waiting for me to be impressed. "Okay," I said. "So, here is the situation," he continued, his voice taking on that business tone he used when he was trying to sound authoritative. "We have the inventory ordered. We have the lease on a storefront in downtown Roanoke, but the digital side is a mess. Kelsey hired some local kid to do a logo and it looks like garbage. We need professional grade." He didn't ask. He just stated the need. I took a bite of my salad, chewing slowly. I waited. "Your Aunt Paige mentioned you are working at some agency up there," Rick said. "So I figured, this is right up your alley. We need the full package. Brooklyn, logo redesign, a website with e-commerce capability, and a social media rollout strategy for the grand opening next month. We need it to look high-end, like New York high-end." He was describing a project that would cost a client $20,000 minimum at Archer & Vale. He was ordering it like a side of fries. "That is a lot of work," I said. "Well, yeah, but you are good at that computer stuff," he said. "It should not take you long. We need the logo by Monday so we can print the signage. The website can wait 2 weeks." I put my fork down. The audacity was breathtaking. He wasn't just asking for a favor. He was assigning me a deadline. "Dad," I said, keeping my voice low so Drew wouldn't hear me from the hallway. "I work full-time. I have classes. I cannot just build a brand identity over the weekend." Rick laughed. It was a dismissive, grating sound. "Don't be dramatic. You always work fast. Besides, this is for your sister. This is big for her. She is really counting on this. She is counting on it. Not, 'We would appreciate your help.'" I looked at the clock on the wall. I thought about the $42,000. I thought about the Mercedes. "I can send you the rate card for freelance work," I said. There was a silence on the other end of the line. It was thick and heavy. "The what?" Rick asked. "My rate card," I repeated, enunciating every word. "If you want a full brand package, logo, web, strategy, I can give you a quote. But I'm telling you now, for the scope you are describing, you are looking at roughly $5,000, and that is the friends and family discount." The silence stretched out. I could hear him breathing. I could almost hear the gears in his head grinding to a halt. He had expected compliance. He had expected the easy child to say yes. "Dad, whatever you need, Brooklyn," he said, his voice dropping an octave. It sounded dangerous now. "Are you asking me for money? To help your family?" "I am telling you that this is my profession." I said, "I do not work for free. Archer & Vale charges $300 an hour for my time. I am offering you a deal. After everything we have done for you," he snapped. The facade of the businessman dropped, revealing the bully underneath. "We put a roof over your head. We raised you. We supported you. And now, the first time we ask for a little help, you try to bill us? Supported me?" The word almost made me laugh. I wanted to scream. I wanted to scream about the bus, about the empty graduation seats, about the car loan in my name that was currently driving around Roanoke, but I didn't. Simone had taught me that in a negotiation. The person who gets emotional loses. I am not an internal department of your household. "Dad," I said coldly, "I am a professional strategist. If you want professional work, you pay professional rates. If you want free work, Kelsey can use Canva." "You have changed," Rick spat out. "You are ungrateful. You go off to that school and think you are better than us? You think you are too good to help your sister?" I stood up. I walked over to the window and looked out at the rain falling on Cincinnati. I felt a strange sense of calm settling over me. The cord was being cut. He was cutting it with every word, and he didn't even know it. I didn't change. "Dad," I said, "I grew up. That is what you always wanted, right? For me to be independent. Well, this is what independent looks like." I hung up. I stared at the phone. My hand was shaking. Just a little. I blocked his number for the rest of the workday. I couldn't deal with the follow-up texts I knew were coming. I went back to my desk. I put my headphones on. I worked for 4 hours straight on a project for a paying client. I made sure every pixel was perfect. That evening, I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone before trying to sleep. I knew I shouldn't look. I knew it was emotional self-harm, but I opened Instagram. Kelsey's story circle was glowing at the top of my feed. I tapped it. It was a black screen with white text. The font was tiny, meant to look like a whispered secret. "It is so sad when people you grew up with get jealous of your shine. Some people can't handle seeing others succeed. They would rather tear you down than help you up. Family drama haters?" Toxic. She hadn't tagged me directly. That would be too brave. But down in the corner, hidden in text so small you had to squint to see it, she had tagged 3 of my old friends from high school, people I still talk to, people who followed me. She was controlling the narrative. She was painting herself as the victim of a jealous, unsupportive sister. I looked at the screen, a year ago. This would have crushed me. I would have called her, crying, apologizing, offering to do the logo just to make the post go away. But tonight, I just looked at it. I thought about the file on my computer named Evidence. I thought about the timeline of transactions. "Go ahead, Kelsey," I whispered to the dark room. "Post your stories. Build your brand." Because I was building a case. And when I was done, a passive-aggressive Instagram story was going to be the least of their problems. I closed the app, I turned off the light, and for the first time in weeks, I slept without dreaming of missing the bus. The final semester of my senior year was not a lap of honor. It was a siege. I was fighting a war on 2 fronts. On one front, I was battling the sheer academic volume required to maintain my standing at the university. On the other, I was acting as a lead strategist on a massive pro bono initiative at Archer and Vale. Simone had assigned me to the Cincy Roots project. It was a data visualization campaign aimed at securing state funding for urban food deserts. My job was to take 10 years of dry, depressing census data and turn it into a narrative that would make politicians cry and open their checkbooks. I slept 4 hours a night. I drank coffee until my hands shook, but I felt alive in a way I never had in Roanoke. I was building something that mattered. 2 weeks before graduation, I was sitting in the student union, debugging a code for the final presentation. My phone buzzed with an email notification. Sender, Office of the Dean. Subject, Commencement Awards. I clicked it open, expecting a generic logistical update about parking passes or gown rentals. I read the first paragraph. I stopped breathing. I read it again. Dear Ms. Young, it is my distinct pleasure to inform you that you have been selected as this year's recipient of the Dean's Medal for Academic Excellence. Furthermore, your capstone project, Visualizing Hunger, has been awarded the Chancellor's Community Impact Award. You will be recognized on stage during the ceremony. Please report to the staging area 30 minutes early for a briefing. I sat back in the hard plastic chair. The noise of the cafeteria, the clattering trays, the laughing students, faded into a dull hum. The Dean's Medal, the highest honor in the college. My first instinct, the one programmed into me since birth, was to call my parents. I wanted to hear my mother's voice pitch up in excitement. I wanted to hear my father brag. I wanted to send a screenshot to the family group chat and finally earn my seat at the table. My thumb hovered over the contact named Dad. Then I remembered the credit report. I remembered the $42,000 of debt anchored to my Social Security number. I remembered the phone call where he demanded I work for free and called me ungrateful when I refused. If I told them, they would ruin it. Rick would somehow make it about his genetics. She gets her brains from me. Mom would worry that the award ceremony would drag on too long and cut into their dinner reservation. Or worse, they would see the award as proof that I was rich now, that my success was a resource they could tap into even more aggressively. I lowered the phone. I deleted the draft text. I replied to the email. I am honored. I will be there. I told no one in my family. I sent them a text with the date, time, and the address of the Berglund Center. I added a note. Please arrive by 9:30. That was it. No mention of the medal. No mention of the speech I had been asked to give to the department the day before. I decided to hoard this victory. It was the one thing they couldn't co-sign, couldn't borrow against, and couldn't give to Kelsey. I did tell Simone and Drew. I walked into Simone's office later that afternoon. She was on a call, but she waved me in. When she hung up, I showed her the email. Simone read it. She didn't smile immediately. She looked at me with a fierce, intense pride that felt heavier and more real than any hug my mother had ever given me. This is huge. Brooklyn, she said. Drew walked in, holding a tablet. What is huge? She won the Dean's Medal. Simone said. Drew whistled. That is the big one. Top of the class? Top of the class, I confirmed. Drew nodded, looking at me with that clinical respect I had come to value more than affection. Good, he said. You earned it. That project you did on the food deserts was professional grade. We should actually hire you to run it for the city next year. He paused, looking at my expression. Your family coming? He asked. They are, I said. But they don't know about this. Drew raised an eyebrow. You didn't tell them? No. I said, I just want to see their faces when they hear it. Simone and Drew exchanged a look. They knew enough about my background to understand the subtext. They knew why I worked through holidays. They knew why I flinched when older men raised their voices. Simone stood up and walked around her desk. She put a hand on my shoulder. This day belongs to you. Brooklyn, she said firmly. Not them. You go up there and you take that hardware. And if they don't cheer loud enough, you look at the section where the faculty sits. Drew and I will be there. You are coming? I asked, surprised. Try and stop us, Drew said. We need to protect our investment. He was joking, but I knew he meant it. I had a team, a real one. Flash forward to the morning of graduation. The air in Roanoke was thick with humidity. I stood in the driveway, the asphalt radiating heat through the soles of my shoes. I watched the scene with the Mercedes unfold. I saw the red bow. I saw Kelsey posing, her hand on her hip, her smile practiced for an audience of digital strangers. I saw Rick snapping photos, directing the show. In part one of this story, I told you I felt like a stranger. That was true. But I left something out. I didn't tell you what was happening in my head while I watched them. When Rick turned to me and pointed at the bus stop, telling me I was used to it, I didn't feel the crushing weight of rejection I used to feel. I felt a cold, sharp clarity. It was almost funny. He was standing there, handing keys to a girl who had dropped out of 3 community college courses, thinking he was displaying power. He was buying a depreciating asset for a liability. Meanwhile, he was banishing the highest performing asset in his portfolio to public transit. He had no idea who he was talking to. He was talking to the terrified daughter from 4 years ago. He didn't know he was talking to a senior strategist who had just uncovered his financial fraud. Go ahead, I thought as I looked at the Mercedes. Take the car. I have the receipts. I walked to the bus stop. My gown dragged on the ground. Yes, people stared. Yes. But as I sat on that bench, waiting for the number 51, I touched the honor cords hidden in my bag. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the spy who had successfully completed the mission and was just waiting for extraction. The bus ride was my decompression chamber. I watched the city roll by, letting go of the anger. I needed to be calm for what was coming. Inside the Berglund Center, the noise was deafening. I found my seat in the front row, reserved for honor students. My parents were in the general seating. They wouldn't see where I was sitting until it was too late. The ceremony dragged on. The speeches were generic. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, my breathing steady. Then, the moment arrived. The announcer, a man with a voice like gravel and honey, stepped to the podium. "Will the candidates for the College of Communication please rise?" he said. We stood. He began reading names. It was a rhythmic drone. Jennifer Adams, Michael Baker, Sarah Collins. Then he paused. He took a breath. "The Dean's Medalist for the class of 2024, he announced, his voice booming through the stadium speakers. Graduating summa cum laude and recipient of the Chancellor's Community Impact Award, Brooklyn Elizabeth Young." The silence that followed the first syllable of my name was instantaneous and electric. I stepped out of the line and walked toward the stairs. I looked up at the Jumbotron screen. My face was there, 10 feet tall. I walked across the stage. The lights were blinding. The dean was smiling, holding the heavy medal on a velvet ribbon. He placed it around my neck. It felt heavy. It felt like armor. I shook his hand. I accepted the glass plaque for the community award, and then I did the thing I had promised myself I would do. I stopped. I turned to the audience. I found the section where my family was sitting. It wasn't hard to find them. Rick was half standing. He wasn't cheering. He looked like someone had just slapped him across the face with a wet towel. He was holding his phone, but he wasn't recording. His arm was limp at his side. Mom was sitting with her hand over her mouth. Her eyes were wide, darting from the program in her lap to the stage, as if trying to find a typo that would explain this mistake. Kelsey? Kelsey looked bored. She was looking down at her lap, likely scrolling through the photos of her and the Mercedes, completely missing the fact that her sister had just been crowned queen of the arena. But then I looked to the left, in the faculty and VIP section. Simone Archer was standing up. She was clapping her hands over her head. Drew was standing next to her. Giving a subtle, singular nod of approval, I smiled, not at my parents, at my team. I walked off the stage. The applause washed over me, but I barely heard it. My blood was rushing in my ears. I went back to my seat. The medal was cold against my chest. I checked my phone. It was vibrating against my leg. Buzz, buzz, buzz. I pulled it out under the cover of my gown. 3 missed calls from Rick, and 1 text message. "Get out here. Now. We need to talk." It wasn't congratulations. It wasn't, "We are so proud." It was a summons. I waited until the recession. I walked out with the other graduates, into the humid air of the plaza. I saw the fountain. I saw the white Mercedes parked illegally on the curb, the hazard lights blinking like a warning signal. Rick was standing there. He was holding the manila envelope, the same envelope I had seen him with earlier. But now he was gripping it so hard, the edges were crumpled. Kelsey was leaning against the car door. She looked up as I approached. She saw the medal around my neck. She saw the glass award in my hand. Her eyes narrowed. She didn't look impressed. She looked annoyed. Finally, she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, "Nice necklace. Does it come with a gift card? Because Daddy has some paperwork for you." She laughed. It was a cruel, knowing sound. I stopped 10 feet away from them. I looked at Rick. I looked at the envelope. I knew what was inside. He didn't know that I knew. He thought he was about to ambush a naive college student with a surprise debt repayment plan. He thought he was about to leverage my success to pay for the car standing behind him. I tightened my grip on my award. "Let's do this," I thought. I stepped forward, into the trap, ready to spring the one I had built for them. The humidity outside the Berglund Center had turned into a suffocating blanket. The sky was a bruised purple, threatening a storm that refused to break. I stood on the concrete plaza, clutching my glass award in one hand and my diploma in the other. Facing the people who shared my DNA but none of my reality, Rick stepped forward. He did not look me in the eye. Instead, he reached out and wrapped his arm around my shoulders, pulling me into a side hug that felt less like an embrace and more like a clamp. He squeezed hard, turning us both slightly so we were facing the parking lot, away from the crowds of other graduates. "Smile," he muttered under his breath. I saw Mom lift her phone. She snapped a picture, then another. "Great," Rick said, releasing me immediately. He smoothed the front of his polo shirt, as if touching me had wrinkled it. Mom stepped closer. She didn't hug me. She reached out and touched the heavy gold medal hanging around my neck. She ran her thumb over the raised lettering of the engraving. She looked at it with the same appraising expression she used when checking the thread count on sheets at a department store. "Dean's Medal," she read aloud, "and the Community Impact Award." She looked up at me, her eyes bright with calculation. "We didn't know you were getting these." She said, "I didn't tell you." I replied, "Well, it is a good thing you got them." Kelsey chimed in. She was leaning against the fender of the white Mercedes, scrolling through the photos Mom had just sent to the family group chat. She looked up, blowing a bubble with her gum. "Honestly, it makes the family look really good," she said. "I can probably use this in my launch story. Like, excellence runs in the genes or something. It adds credibility to the brand if my sister is smart." She said it without a hint of irony. My academic blood, sweat, and tears were just content fodder for her boutique. Rick cleared his throat. He was tapping the manila envelope against his thigh again. The rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack was the only sound in the circle for a moment. "Let's cut to the chase. Brooklyn," he said. "We are proud. Obviously. Good job. But now the party is over and we need to talk logistics." He gestured to the envelope. "I have been running the numbers," he said. "You are done with school. The dorms kick you out in 48 hours. You need a place to live, and we need help with the business." He took a step closer, invading my personal space. "So here's the plan," he announced. "You move back home. Your old room is, well, it is currently storage for Kelsey's inventory. But we can clear a corner for a bed. You live rent-free. In exchange, you take over the branding and operations for Velvet and Vine. You build the site. You run the ads. You handle the logistics." He smiled, a wide, magnanimous grin that didn't reach his eyes. "It is a win-win." He said, "You save money on rent. We get free expertise. And you get to pay us back for the last 4 years." I stood there, the heat rising from the pavement burning through the soles of my shoes. The offer was so insulting it was almost elegant. He wasn't just asking me to work for free. He was asking me to move back into the box they had built for me. He wanted to strip away the identity I had built in Cincinnati, the strategist, the award winner, the independent woman, and turn me back into the servant. I took a deep breath. I channeled Simone. I channeled Drew. I channeled the version of myself that commanded $18 an hour and the respect of CEOs. "No," I said. The word hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Rick's smile faltered. He blinked, as if I had spoken in a foreign language. "Excuse me?" he said. I said no. I repeated, my voice steady. "I am not moving back to Roanoke, and I am not working for free." Mom gasped softly. She looked around to see if anyone was watching. "Brooklyn, don't be difficult," she hissed. "Your father is making you a generous offer. Do you know how much rent costs these days?" "I do." I said, "I know exactly what the market rates are, which is why I accepted a job offer last week." Rick froze. The envelope stopped tapping against his leg. "A job offer?" he asked. "Full-time," I said. "Junior strategist at Archer & Vale in Cincinnati. Starting salary is $65,000 a year, plus full benefits and a signing bonus." I watched the number hit him. 65,000. It wasn't a fortune, but for a 22-year-old in Ohio, it was solid. More importantly, it was independent money. It was money he couldn't touch. "I have already signed the lease on an apartment in downtown Cincinnati," I continued. "I move in on Monday, so, no, I will not be coming home to sleep in a corner of a storage room." Rick's face turned a shade of red that matched the bow on the Mercedes. His jaw tightened. The benevolent patriarch mask cracked, revealing the anger underneath. "You chose a job over your family?" he demanded. His voice rose, sharp and biting. You are choosing some small, insignificant desk job in Ohio over helping your sister build a legacy? Legacy? I thought, you mean a drop-shipping scheme funded by my credit score? It is not a small job. Dad, I said calmly. It is a career. It is selfish, he snapped. He took a step forward, looming over me. After everything we have done for you, we sacrificed to get you here. We supported you, and the minute you get a piece of paper, you turn your back on us? You are ungrateful. Brooklyn, you are cold. I felt the anger rising in my chest, hot and molten, but I didn't let it explode. I let it crystallize. I let it turn into data. I looked him dead in the eye. You keep using that word. I said, investment, sacrifice, support. I took a step forward, closing the distance between us. Specifically, what did you invest? I asked. Rick blinked. What? I want an itemized list. I said. My voice was low, but it cut through the humid air like a knife, because I work in finance now. Dad, I look at ledgers all day, and when I look at the ledger of my life, I don't see your deposits. I raised my left hand, counting off on my fingers. Did you pay my tuition? No. The presidential scholarship paid that. I raised a second finger. Did you pay my rent? No. I worked 3 jobs. I sorted mail at 6 in the morning. I reset passwords until midnight. I delivered pizzas to drunk freshmen while you were sleeping. I raised a third finger. Did you pay for my books? My food? My clothes? No. That came from the tips I made driving a 10-year-old car that I bought myself. Rick opened his mouth to interrupt, but I didn't let him. And today, I said, my voice trembling slightly with the force of the memory, on the day I am graduating with the highest honors in the university, on the day I am being recognized as the top student in my field, you made me take the bus. I pointed to the bus stop across the street, visible in the distance. You drove a $60,000 car to the front door, and you told me to walk to the bus stop in my gown because I was used to it. Mom looked away. She picked at a loose thread on her dress. Kelsey stopped chewing her gum. So tell me, Dad, I said, dropping my hand, what exactly are you asking a return on? Because from where I'm standing, you have 0 equity in my success. Rick stared at me. His face was purple now. He looked like a man who had gone to withdraw money from an ATM only to be told his PIN was invalid. He wasn't used to resistance. He was used to control. He laughed, but it was a cruel, sputtering sound. Oh, so you are keeping score now? He sneered. You think because you paid a few bills you are a martyr? You are part of a family. Brooklyn. Families help each other. Families support each other. I corrected. Clients pay each other. I gestured to Kelsey. If you want me to build a brand for Velvet and Vine, I will do it. I am a professional. I will send you a contract on Monday. My freelance rate is $150 an hour. I require a 30% deposit up front. $150? Kelsey shrieked. That is robbery. It is market rate, I said, looking at her. Actually, it is a discount. Archer & Vale charges $300. I looked back at Rick. If you want a branding team, hire one. If you want a daughter, try treating me like one. But do not confuse the two. I am done being the free labor that subsidizes her lifestyle. Rick stood there, breathing heavily. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides. The manila envelope was crumpled in his grip. He looked at the award in my hand, then at the defiant tilt of my chin. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that he had lost. He had pushed the easy child too far, and she had turned into iron. He stepped back. He adjusted his collar. He tried to regain his composure, to pull the shreds of his authority back around him. Fine, he spat out. The word was like a bullet. If that is how you want it. Brooklyn, go to your little job in Cincinnati. Live your little life. He turned toward the Mercedes. He unlocked the doors with a chirp of the key fob. But listen to me, he said, turning back one last time. His eyes were cold, devoid of any fatherly warmth. They were the eyes of a stranger. Don't expect the family to stand by you when you fail. Don't call us when you are lonely. Don't come crawling back when that city chews you up. You are on your own. He waited for me to flinch. He waited for me to beg. He waited for the fear of abandonment to crack my resolve. But he didn't know that I had been on my own since I was 8 years old. He didn't know that his threat was just a description of my reality. I looked him in the eye. I didn't blink. I stopped expecting you to stand by me a long time ago. Dad, I said softly. Rick sneered. He got into the driver's seat. Mom hurried into the passenger side, refusing to look at me. Kelsey threw her bag into the back and slammed the door. Shooting me a glare through the window, the engine roared to life. The Mercedes purred, a machine of pure luxury and status, as they pulled away, peeling out of the no-parking zone with an arrogant screech of tires. I watched the car go. I watched the sunlight glint off the polar white paint, and as I watched the rear license plate fade into the distance, a cold realization settled in my stomach. I had just told him I had a job. I had just told him I was financially independent, and I saw the way his eyes had flickered when I mentioned the salary. He wasn't angry that I was leaving. He was angry that a revenue stream was walking away. I looked at the Mercedes again. I thought about the manila envelope he was still holding, the plan I had refused to look at. And then I thought about the car loan on my credit report. The payments were $680 a month. I narrowed my eyes. The car looked brand new, but the dealership sticker on the bumper wasn't from Roanoke. It was from a luxury auto group in Cincinnati. Wait, why would my father, who lived in Virginia, lease a car from a dealership in Ohio? The pieces of the puzzle slammed together in my mind with the force of a physical blow. The joint savings account, the location of my university, the verification phone calls I had vaguely remembered him asking me to sit in on years ago. He didn't just use my credit history. He used my physical location. He had leased that car in Ohio, using my address, my information, and probably my presence in the state to bypass out-of-state leasing restrictions. That car didn't just belong to the family. In the eyes of the law, that car probably belonged to me. I watched the Mercedes disappear around the corner. You told me I was on my own. Dad, I whispered to the empty air. I gripped my diploma tighter. You have no idea how right you are, and you have no idea what I am about to do with that independence. I turned around and walked back toward the Berglund Center to find Simone and Drew. I didn't need a ride. I had a war to plan. 8 months later, the glass walls of Archer and Vale felt less like an office and more like a fortress I had built to keep the chaos of my past at bay. I had settled into my life in Cincinnati with the kind of aggressive normalcy that usually hides deep trauma. I paid my rent on the first of the month. I bought groceries on Sundays. I had a favorite coffee shop, a favorite jogging route along the river, and a job title that commanded respect. I was no longer the intern. I was a junior strategist, running point on 2 major accounts. My life was measured in deliverables, KPIs, and billable hours. It was clean. It was logical. It was mine. The radio silence from Roanoke had been absolute. For 8 months, I had not received a single phone call, no birthday card, no text messages. I stalked them occasionally on social media, watching from a burner account as Kelsey teased the launch of Velvet and Vine. Her posts were a masterclass in vaporware. She posted photos of fabric swatches. She posted time-lapse videos of herself designing on an iPad. She posted countdowns to a launch date that kept moving. The captions were always full of buzzwords. Big things coming, CEO mindset, building the empire. My parents were always in the comments. So proud of you. Sweetie. My mother would write, this is going to be huge. Rick would add. They were playing house, pretending to be business moguls. I stayed out of it. I focused on my work. It was a Tuesday afternoon in February when the illusion of my safety shattered. I was in the middle of a deep dive analysis for a logistics client. My desk was covered in charts. I had my noise-canceling headphones on, drowning out the hum of the open plan office. The internal chat on my screen blinked. It was Sasha, the receptionist at the front desk. Brooklyn, do you have a meeting scheduled in the war room? I typed back, no, I am at my desk. Why? 3 dots danced on the screen. Because there are 3 people here asking for you. They said they are your management team, and honestly, They are kind of making a scene. My blood ran cold. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Who are they? I typed. Though I already knew. Older couple, and a girl in a pink trench coat who is currently taking a selfie with the company logo on the wall. I ripped my headphones off. I stood up so fast my chair rolled back and hit the desk behind me. They were here. I had never given them my address. I had never told them which floor Archer and Vale occupied. I had never invited them into this world. I walked toward the lobby. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic, bird-like rhythm. I told myself to be calm. I told myself I was a strategist. I told myself I was an adult, but when I rounded the corner and saw them, I felt 12 years old again. They looked like they were dressed for a caricature of a business meeting. Rick was wearing a suit that was slightly too shiny. Mom was wearing a dress with a bold floral print and carrying a designer bag I knew was fake. And Kelsey was treating the lobby of Archer and Vale like a set. She was posing next to the brushed steel sign, holding a Starbucks cup, tilting her head for the perfect angle. "See, this is the vibe I want," she was saying to my mother. "Industrial chic, but with more pink." Rick saw me first. He didn't look sheepish. He didn't look apologetic for showing up unannounced after 8 months of silence. He looked impatient. "Finally," he said, checking his watch. "We have been waiting 10 minutes. We have a schedule." "Brooklyn." I stopped 5 feet away from them. Sasha, the receptionist, looked at me with wide eyes, silently asking if she should call security. "What are you doing here?" I asked. My voice was low, controlled. "How did you find this place?" Rick scoffed. He waved a hand in the air. "LinkedIn, Brooklyn, it is a public platform. You listed the address right on your profile. Do not be paranoid." He clapped his hands together. "Now, where can we set up?" "We need a room with a projector and a whiteboard. We have the mood boards in the car. But I have the deck on my iPad." I stared at him. "Set up?" "Dad, this is a place of business." I said, "You cannot just walk in here and demand a conference room. I am working." Rick stepped closer. He lowered his voice, but it lost none of its edge. "We are working too," he said. "And since you are the big shot strategist now, you are going to consult. We are finally launching next month, and we need you to sign off on the creative direction so we can start the ad spend." He said it with such absolute authority. "You are going to consult, not, 'Can you help?' Not 'Please.'" I looked at Kelsey. She had finished her photo shoot and was now looking at me. "Yeah," she said, popping her gum. "The guy I hired for the logo was a total flake. Daddy said you could fix it. He said you have access to the good software here." I felt a vein throb in my temple. "I cannot fix it." I said, "I am an employee here. I cannot use company resources for personal projects. That is theft." Rick rolled his eyes. He looked at Mom. "See? I told you she would be difficult." He turned back to me. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers. He shoved them into my chest. I instinctively grabbed them to keep them from falling. "Just look at it," he commanded. "We have a meeting with the investors at 4. We need to show them that the creative lead is on board." I froze. The papers in my hand were a mess. Clip art, fonts that didn't match. But the words he had just said rang in my ears like a gunshot. "Meeting with who?" I asked. "The investors," Rick said, adjusting his tie. "We got some capital. A few local guys in Roanoke, and a silent partner up here." "And what did you tell them?" I asked, my voice trembling with a sudden, horrifying realization. Rick shrugged. He looked bored. "I told them the truth. That Velvet and Vine is a family business. That my daughter, who is a top strategist at Archer and Vale, is heading up the branding and marketing." The air left my lungs. "You did what?" I whispered. "It sealed the deal," Rick said, grinning. "Once they knew you were attached, they wrote the check. It is good leverage. Brooklyn, you should be flattered. Your name actually has some value now." He had committed fraud. He had sold my professional reputation to secure funding for a vanity project I wanted nothing to do with. If those investors found out I wasn't involved, they could sue. If my bosses found out I was being sold as a moonlighting creative director, I could be fired. Excuse me. The voice came from behind me. It was deep, calm, and terrifying. I turned around. Drew Vale was standing there. He was holding a mug of coffee. He was wearing his signature black turtleneck. He looked at Rick. Then he looked at the papers in my hand. Then he looked at me. "Is there a problem here, Brooklyn?" Drew asked. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Rick stepped forward. He extended a hand to Drew. "Rick Young," he said, using his salesman voice. "Brooklyn's father. We are just going over some strategy for the family account. Brooklyn is helping us launch our new venture. I assume that is all right? We are keeping it in the family, so to speak." Drew didn't shake his hand. He looked at Rick's hand until Rick slowly lowered it. "The family account?" Drew repeated. "Yes," Rick said, faltering slightly. "Velvet and Vine. We are telling our investors that Archer & Vale's best talent is overseeing the rollout." Drew turned his head slowly to look at me. His eyes were unreadable behind his glasses. "Is that true, Brooklyn?" he asked. "Are you the creative lead on this project?" "No," I said. The word exploded out of me. "No, I have never seen these papers before. I am not involved in this." Rick's face went red. "Now wait a minute. Brooklyn," he started. Drew held up a hand. Silence fell over the lobby. "Mr. Young," Drew said. His voice was very quiet. "Archer & Vale does not take on clients without a signed retainer. Our minimum engagement fee is $50,000. And we certainly do not allow our employees to be used as unauthorized collateral for outside investments." He took a sip of his coffee. "If you are telling investors that this agency is involved in your business, you are committing corporate misrepresentation, and if you are doing it on my premises, you are trespassing." Rick sputtered. He looked at Mom, who was clutching her fake designer bag to her chest. We are just asking for family help." Rick stammered. "Then do it at home," Drew said. "Not in my lobby." He looked at me. "Brooklyn, fix this," he said. "You have 5 minutes to clear the lobby. And then I want to see you in my office. We need to talk about what exactly your name is attached to out there." Drew turned and walked away. I stood there, shaking. The humiliation was total. My sanctuary had been breached. My boss, the man I respected most in the world, now looked at me with suspicion. I turned to my father. The fear I usually felt was gone, replaced by a cold, blinding rage. "You have to leave," I said. Rick stared at me. The charm was gone. He looked cornered. "You embarrassed me," he hissed. "In front of that man, you made me look like a fool. You made yourself look like a criminal." I shot back. "You lied to investors. Dad, you used my name. You used my company's name. Do you have any idea how illegal that is?" "I was helping you," he shouted. People in the lobby turned to stare. I was building something for this family. If this business takes off, we all win. Kelsey wins. You win. I stepped closer to him. I was shaking the papers in his face. "I am not part of your we," I said. "I am not your partner. I am not your asset. I am a stranger to you. You made sure of that when you left me at the bus stop." Rick grabbed the papers from my hand. He ripped them back so hard the paper tore. "You are ungrateful," he spat. "You think you are safe here? You think you are untouchable because you have a little desk and a salary?" He leaned in close. His breath smelled of mints and stale coffee. "You are nothing without us. Brooklyn, you are only here because we let you go. And if you don't help us, if you let this deal fall through because you are too proud to verify the paperwork, you will regret it." "Is that a threat?" I asked. "It is a promise," he said. He turned to Mom and Kelsey. "Let's go." Mom looked at me. For a second, I saw hesitation in her eyes, but then Rick grabbed her elbow, and she fell into line. Kelsey rolled her eyes, put her phone in her pocket, and followed them out the revolving doors. I watched them leave. I stood in the lobby until the glass doors stopped spinning. Sasha looked at me from the desk. "Are you okay?" she whispered. "No," I said. "I went to Drew's office. I explained everything. I told him about the investors. I told him about the lies. I offered to resign if it was a liability. Drew listened. He didn't fire me. He told me to draft a cease and desist letter on company letterhead to my own father, clarifying that Archer and Vale had no association with Velvet and Vine. "Send it," he said. "Cover your tracks. And Brooklyn?" "Yes. If they show up here again. I am calling the police. Not for me. For you." I worked until 9 that night. I was afraid to go home. I was afraid they were waiting in the parking lot. When I finally got to my apartment, I locked the door and engaged the deadbolt. I poured myself a glass of water and sat on the floor. Leaning against the wall, my phone buzzed. I jumped. I looked at the screen. It was a notification from my bank app, but not my current bank. It was an email alert from the Junior Saver account, the one I had tried to close years ago, the one I thought was empty, the one Rick had refused to sign off on. I opened the email. Transaction alert. Insufficient funds. Attempted charge. $689. Merchant. Mercedes-Benz. Financial services. Auto pay. Status. Declined. I stared at the screen. He hadn't just used my credit history to lease the car. He had linked the auto pay to the joint account, the account that had my name on it, but that wasn't the worst part. A second notification popped up. Overdraft protection transfer initiated. Source. Connected checking account. Ending in 4421, my blood stopped moving. The account ending in 4421. That was my current checking account, the one where my paycheck went, the one I used to pay my rent, when I had moved to Cincinnati. I had opened a new account at the same bank because it was convenient, and because the systems were linked by my Social Security number. The bank had automatically connected them for overdraft protection. Rick knew. He knew the old account was empty. He knew the payment would bounce, and he knew that because the accounts were linked, the bank would pull the money from my primary funds to cover his debt. He wasn't just threatening me. He was robbing me. I checked my balance. Minus $689. My rent was due in 2 days. I sat on the floor, the blue light of the phone illuminating the tears that finally, after 8 months, began to fall. He had brought the wrong straight to my office, and now he had brought his hand straight into my pocket. I dialed the number for the bank's fraud department. My hand was shaking so hard I had to use 2 hands to hold the phone, but as the hold music played, a cold, hard resolve replaced the panic. He wanted a war? He wanted to involve the authorities? I looked at the cease and desist letter I had drafted earlier. "Fine, Dad," I whispered. "If you want to play with the law, let's see how you like it when the law plays back." The red notification on my phone screen was not just a banking alert. It was an autopsy report of my relationship with my family. I spent that entire night sitting on the floor of my apartment in Cincinnati, surrounded by printed bank statements. I had called the 24-hour fraud line, but the investigation would take days. I needed answers now. I logged into the old joint savings account, the one I had tried to close, the one Rick had refused to sign off on. I had assumed it was empty. I was wrong. It was a conduit. I scrolled through 18 months of transaction history. It was a masterclass in financial parasitism. There were dozens of small deposits made by my father, immediately followed by withdrawals for things that were clearly for Kelsey. $50 here for supplies, $100 there for cosmetics. But then came the auto drafts. I saw the setup for the Mercedes lease payment. It was linked to this account. Rick had set it up so that the lease payment would pull from the joint savings. He would deposit just enough cash to cover it a day before. But this month, he had forgotten. Or maybe he just didn't have the cash because he was over-leveraged on Kelsey's inventory. So the payment hit the empty savings account, and because of the bank's helpful overdraft protection policy. The system looked for a linked account with available funds. It found my personal checking account, the one I had opened at the same branch when I moved to Cincinnati. The systems had merged our profiles based on my Social Security number. He hadn't just stolen $689. He had built a trapdoor under my financial floorboards, waiting for the day he slipped up so I would fall through. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I walked into Archer and Vale with eyes that felt like they were filled with sand, but my mind was razor sharp. I went straight to the HR department. I asked for the contact information for the legal aid service included in our benefits package. By noon, I was sitting in the office of a civil litigation attorney named Sarah Jenkins. I laid it all out: the unauthorized use of my credit profile, the joint account, the overdraft, the fraudulent misrepresentation to investors. Sarah looked at the documents. She took off her glasses. "This is identity theft. Brooklyn," she said, "plain and simple. We can file a police report right now. We can have him arrested." I considered it. I imagined Rick in handcuffs. I imagined the scandal. "No," I said. "If I arrest him, he becomes a martyr. He becomes the victim of an ungrateful daughter. I want to end this quietly, but I want to end it permanently. I want a complete severance." We drafted a demand letter. It was brutal. It required him to immediately remove my name from the lease, refinance the vehicle, reimburse the stolen funds, and sign a contract barring him from ever using my name or likeness for business purposes again. But I needed one more piece of evidence to prove intent. I needed to prove he didn't just make a mistake with the accounts. I called Aunt Paige. She answered on the first ring. "I know," she said. "I saw the credit alert you sent me. I need proof." "Paige," I said, "I know he did this on purpose, but I need to know how he linked the accounts without my signature." There was a pause. I heard the clicking of a keyboard. "Do you remember last year?" Paige asked. "Right before you graduated? Rick called you in a panic saying he needed you to verify your identity with the bank because of some Patriot Act update for the savings account?" I frowned. I vaguely remembered. I was studying for finals. He had put me on a three-way call with a banker. I had recited my social security number and answered a security question. That wasn't an update. "Brooklyn," Paige said, "I found an email he sent to your mother about it. He was on the line with the leasing agent. He used your voice verification to authorize the cross-collateralization. He tricked you into co-signing the lease over the speakerphone." I felt a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. He tricked me. He used my trust, my exhaustion, and my desire to just help and get back to studying, to shackle me to a $60,000 debt. "Send me the email." I said, "I have a flight to catch." I didn't mail the demand letter. I hand-delivered it. I flew to Roanoke on Saturday morning. I rented a car, a cheap, reliable compact, and drove to the coffee shop where Rick held his business meetings. I knew he would be there. It was his stage. I walked in at 10 o'clock. They were there, Rick, Mom, and Kelsey. They were sitting at a high-top table, surrounded by mood boards and fabric samples. Rick was talking loudly on his phone, performing the role of the busy executive. When he saw me, he froze. He lowered the phone. "Brooklyn?" he said. He looked smug. He thought I had come to apologize. He thought the threat of the investors and the pressure he had applied in my office had worked. "I am glad you came to your senses," he said, hanging up the phone. "Sit down. We have a lot of work to do on the website." I didn't sit. I stood at the end of the table. I placed my leather portfolio on the surface, right on top of a swatch of pink velvet. "I am not here to work." "Dad," I said. Rick's smile faltered. "Then what are you here for? To embarrass us again?" I opened the portfolio. I pulled out 3 documents: the bank statement showing the overdraft, the printout of the email Paige had sent me, and the legal demand letter drafted by my attorney. I slid them across the table. "I am here to collect," I said. Rick looked at the papers. He picked up the bank statement. He saw the highlighted transaction. He saw the negative balance in my checking account. He didn't look ashamed. He looked annoyed that he had been caught. It was a banking error. He said dismissively, "The funds got crossed. I will write you a check. Stop being dramatic. It wasn't an error." I said, "And you can't write a check." "Dad, I checked your balances. You are overdrawn." I pointed to the email printout. "You tricked me into co-signing that car." I said, "You used my credit score because yours is ruined. And you linked it to my bank account because you knew you couldn't make the payments." Mom picked up the legal letter. Her hands started to shake. "Brooklyn," she whispered, This says you will sue us?" civil litigation for fraud, identity theft, and conversion of funds. I said, Kelsey looked up from her phone. She looked at the documents, then at me. Her eyes filled with tears. I didn't know. She stammered, I swear. Brooklyn, Daddy just gave me the keys. He said he handled it. I didn't know it was your money. I looked at my sister. For the first time, I actually believed her. She wasn't the villain. She was just the pet. She was the spoiled poodle that didn't know the kibble came from a stolen bag. It doesn't matter if you knew. Kelsey, I said softly, you are driving a stolen car. Rick slammed his hand on the table. The coffee cups rattled. It is not stolen, he shouted. People turned to look. It is family property. You are my daughter. What is yours is ours. That is how families work. No, I said, that is how parasites work. I leaned in. I wanted him to hear this. I wanted him to understand that the dynamic had shifted permanently. Do you remember graduation day? I asked. Rick glared at me. Do you remember telling me to take the bus because I was used to it? I didn't wait for an answer. I believed you. I said, I thought you were just being hard on me. I thought you were teaching me a lesson about independence. I tapped the bank statement where the Mercedes payment was highlighted. But that wasn't it, was it? I looked him dead in the eye. You didn't make me take the bus because I was strong. You made me take the bus because you had already spent my safety net on her heated seats. You needed me to be low maintenance because you were using my maintenance budget to fund her luxury. The truth hung in the air between us. It was ugly and undeniable. Mom put her hand over her mouth. She knew. She had always known. Rick's face turned purple. He opened his mouth to yell, to bully, to assert his dominance one last time. Save it, I said, cutting him off. I pointed to the legal document. You have two choices. Rick, option A is you sign this document. You agree to refinance the car in your own name within 30 days. You agree to reimburse me the $689 plus the overdraft fees immediately, and you agree to remove my name from all marketing materials for Velvet and Vine. And option B? He sneered. Option B is that I walk out of here, I drive to the police station, and I file a report for identity theft. And then I call your investors and tell them exactly who is, and isn't, running your brand. Rick looked at the investors' names on his phone screen. He looked at the legal threat. He looked at me. He saw the strategist. He saw the girl who analyzed data for a living. He realized that I had run the numbers, and he had zero leverage. He picked up the pen. He signed the document with a furious, jagged scrawl. He threw the pen down. There, he spat. Are you happy? You have destroyed this family. I picked up the papers. I checked the signature. It was valid. I didn't destroy anything. I said, I just audited the books, and I found the corruption. I turned to go. Brooklyn. Mom said. Her voice was weak. Where are you going? Home, I said, to Cincinnati. I walked out of the coffee shop. I didn't look back. I didn't feel sad. I felt light, the weight of 22 years of obligation, of being the backup plan, of being the resource, had vanished. The fallout was swift. Rick couldn't refinance the Mercedes. His credit was too poor. He had to return the car to the dealership 3 weeks later. Kelsey posted a long, vague story about downsizing to focus on the spiritual journey, but I knew the truth. The investors pulled out of Velvet and Vine when I sent a formal notice that I was not associated with the brand. Without the capital and the expert strategist attached, the business folded before it ever opened. Rick and Mom stopped talking to me. They told the extended family that I had abandoned them, that I had become an arrogant city girl who hated her roots. I let them tell that story. I didn't care about their narrative anymore. I was writing my own. A month after the confrontation in Roanoke, I walked into a used car dealership in Cincinnati. I didn't look at the luxury sedans. I walked to the back row. I found a Honda Civic. It was 5 years old. It was gray. It had 40,000 miles on it. I sat in the driver's seat. It smelled like shampooed upholstery. It didn't have heated leather seats. It didn't have a giant red bow. I paid for it in cash. My cash. Money I had earned from billable hours and late nights. Money that no one else had a claim to. I drove it off the lot. I rolled the windows down. The wind hit my face. It wasn't a Mercedes. It was better. It was freedom. But sometimes, on days when the weather is nice, I leave the Honda parked in my garage. I walk to the corner of my street. I wait for the number 17 bus to take me downtown to the agency. I pay my fare. I sit by the window. I watch the city roll by. I take the bus, not because I have to, not because I'm the backup plan, not because I am being punished. I take it because I can. And as the bus pulls away from the curb, leaving the ghosts of my past in the exhaust, I smile. Because now, finally, I am the one driving the story. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop your location in the comments below so we can connect. If you enjoyed this story of justice and reclaiming control, please make sure to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people who need to hear it.